chair of its editorial board, the programming committee. For those of you joining us by live stream, we're coming to you from the Ellis in Columbus's historic Italian village. Welcome, everybody. If you scan the QR codes at your tables, you can learn more about today's forum, take a short survey, and see the many organizations that support your not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. Speaking of supporters, we're so grateful to today's sponsor, the Columbus region. And thank you to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Ellis for hosting us. Every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's program. Okay, Ohio's energy demand is set to skyrocket with the rise of data centers, electric vehicles, and the shutdown of aging power plants. Can the state's power generation keep pace, or will electricity shortages hinder Ohio's growth? Today, we welcome industry leaders and experts as we explore the real power play essential for our state's economic growth. It's my great honor to welcome our panelists. Please welcome Ryan Augsburger, President of the Ohio Manufacturers Association. Kenny McDonald, President and CEO of One Columbus. I don't know what he's telling me. Janine Migden-Ostrander, I'm pushing buttons, former Ohio Consumers Counsel. She's, there we go. She's also a fellow with the Pace University Law School Energy and Climate Center. Todd Snitchler, President and CEO of the Electric Power Supply Association. And our host, Bryant, Petway, construction executive with ArchKey Solutions, and I might add a 2024 Business First 40 Under 40. Congratulations, Bryant.
Yeah, thanks for that plug, Doug. I appreciate it. He's also the reason I'm standing up here, so I'm excited to be up here. So yeah, I know we're enjoying lunch, and I'm excited to talk about the wonderful parfait that is our energy solution or energy crisis here in Central Ohio. It's an interesting conversation I know a lot of us have, and I'm excited to hear more from these four panelists about the issues and the opportunities that we have. To Doug's point, an aging infrastructure, the lack of energy diversification, the economic development, right? Central Ohio is a huge hub for data center investment. And also the public policy aspect. How do we make sure that we maintain affordability and accessibility with this growing and staggering demand? So with that, I want to turn to each one of our panelists. Take a couple minutes, each of you, to just kind of let us know how we got here. Can you briefly just describe from your perspective the current situation and why we're here today? I'll start with you, Ryan.
All right. Well, thank you, Bryant. Appreciate the invitation by the Metropolitan Club to be here today. Representing manufacturing sector, Ohio's largest private industry sector, 1,300 member companies is who we represent. And for us, the interest is in affordable, reliable power. You're going to hear that from all of us. So it's really important that we have reliable power, but it also needs to be affordable because we're in a global economy. And if our manufacturers are going to compete, it needs to be an affordable resource. If it's not reliable, you can't run a factory, of course. So our contention in this discussion today is that Ohio has enjoyed a competitive advantage in the supply of that reliable, affordable power. Why? Because Ohio made some good choices in deregulating power generation in 1999. And Ohio has the benefit of several important natural resources, natural gas, certainly, coal, nuclear, wind, solar, and now batteries. And other important resources Ohio is benefiting from include water, our quality of workforce, transmission lines. We have an abundant transmission lines. And of course, nimble economic development network through Jobs Ohio and the One Columbus friends who are with us here. Therefore, Ohio, we believe, is well situated to attract new generation and to do it quickly. It's not a vision of scarcity and crisis. It's a vision of growth, investment, abundance, which will lead us to continued competitive advantage. As we talk about this topic today, I think it's important to keep in mind there's three categories of charges in your power bill as we get into the policy debate, right? There's the generation, that's deregulated. That was in 1999, deregulated, competition. But then you have the transmission component and the distribution component. Those are still monopoly utility managed. So over the past decade, we as a customer group have seen wires charges applied to different riders on customers' power bills. So that's on the distribution and transmission. Frankly, the cost increases of those above market charges is unsustainable long term. On the transmission component alone, that's the big metal steel towers you see across the state importing power outside of the state and throughout all corners of the state. Transmission is very important. That's our grid. But we also need to be getting, customers need to be getting a benefit for that. Customers are paying 300% more in transmission charges per power bill than they were in the baseline year of 2016 and before. Are customers getting the benefit for it? We think there's reason to question that. So bottom line, as we continue our discussion today, my contention is going to be that manufacturers, businesses, we want greater transparency so that customers, regulators, economic development, and, developers and others, they can know where the grid is ready for energy-intensive businesses. Before I conclude, just a minute on demand. We've been living largely in an era of flat demand for about a quarter century of electric demand. Only now is demand beginning to tick up, and it's doing so gradually, not exponentially. So the conclusion, I guess, we will have, and I'll look forward to the discussion. The question is not so much, will we have enough power to meet growing demand? Instead, the question is, why wouldn't competitive markets, innovation, continue to meet that demand when it shows up? It always has. So let's stay the course on competitive markets and let's solve this problem and drive opportunities.
Hi, Kenny McDonald with One Columbus. I agree with much of what Ryan said. I would just begin and maybe step back a second. We are living in really interesting times. I see across the room a lot of people that work in the energy industry or work on energy policy and stuff. We're going through a really big stress test as a country, maybe even globally, on this issue. As Ryan said, we've lived in an era where there's really flat demand, and because of technology, we were delivering around the world, for very productive energy. So we were using our energy very well. That began to change about 24 months ago. Our journey with data centers here in Central Ohio started in 2015. We were fortunate enough to announce the 3 AWS centers at Hilliard, Dublin, and New Albany. At that time, each one of those centers was a very big user and a big capital investment. But 24 months ago, when AI started to take hold, you could correlate this exactly when ChatGPT started to go public, and something we started to query in, instead of using Google, we started using ChatGPT and Copilot and things like that. Energy usage started to really change. And I was alerted to this actually by some southern utility partners that were going through this in their markets. And we were starting to see for the first time our utilities, and this is a lot of them, AES and First Energy and AEP, when we would go to a site and show a client a site with great infrastructure attached to it, we're not sure we can actually meet that load. We're going to have to check on that because of the increasing demand we had from some of the AI hyperscale data centers. I think some of you read yesterday we're now a number 3 location in the country for installed operational data center capacity. And that's a big leap. We had none of those data centers 10 years ago. And to go to number 3 in the country is a big deal. That's brought billions of investment. It's brought a lot of infrastructure behind it, substations, transmission lines. With it becomes, a lot of responsibility, which I think is what we're here to talk about today. Economic growth has always been tied to energy. We live on it. We depend on it more than we even realize when we get up in the morning and move through our day personally. Those data centers hold your financial information, your health information, everything about you is in one of those data centers. So I want them to stay up and operational from that standpoint. And number 2, I want Ryan's manufacturing partners to make sure that the software that they run the plant on, probably in that cloud in one of those data centers as well, is well supported. And quite frankly, I'd like my refrigerator to stay on and my alarm clock to go off in the morning as well. So we all depend on this. The only thing I would maybe to amend, maybe use a slightly different word than Ryan did, I don't disagree with affordable, but I prefer the word competitive. I think as the world has to change, the generation has to change, infrastructure has to change around the world, there's going to need a lot of investment. And this is outside the United States, but certainly here in the United States, to actually catch up with some of the demand and to do things a little differently. And I prefer the word competitive. Competitive, reliable, and abundant. Those would be the three words that I would use when I think about our energy sector. We need all three of those components if we're going to grow Ohio's economy and also get through our day on a daily basis on the way we're dependent on all of the people that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this conversation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Janine Migden-Ostrander, and I'd like to thank the Columbus Metropolitan Club for putting together this panel. I didn't expect right off the bat to begin with a disagreement, but I'm going to. I think, and that's to you, Kenny. I think it's important that we look at, as we grow, we look at affordability. Affordability is an extremely important concept when you consider the fact that Ohio's poverty level is below the national average significantly. And when you look at the fact that on average, 1 in 10 customers may be disconnected from electric or gas service because of unaffordability. They can't afford to pay their bill. 1 in 5 struggles to make their payments within 60 days. So we have a real problem with the cost of energy right now and the energy burden, especially on low-income customers. So we have to keep that in the forefront and make sure that what we're doing is choosing options that are going to be the least cost option. The very least cost option is energy efficiency. And unfortunately, we had a law that would have allowed certain targets in energy efficiency, but that was pulled out of the law in order to finance part of the HB6 utility subsidies, corporate subsidies for their power plants. We need to bring that back in. Energy efficiency not only lowers the cost, the system-wide cost, but for every household, every business, every mom and pop store that participates in it, they can lower their energy bills and get closer to that point of affordability. Tying energy efficiency with low-income programs, with weatherization programs, can help also keep the lights on for low-income customers who are struggling every day. So then after we look at that, we need to look at other programs like demand response. Demand response are programs like having time-of-use rates. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars to install smart meters in the state of Ohio, and yet we have very little in the way to show for it in terms of programs for customers to use demand response programs. Another example of a demand response program would be where a utility on a voluntary program installs chips in the homes of customers. And so when they're getting to a point where there is a power shortage, as opposed to shutting off power in a whole lot of neighborhoods, what they do is they would cycle down the air conditioning in people's homes for 15 minutes every couple of hours and do that throughout their service territory or the areas that are at risk in order to avoid shutdowns. They're not doing any of this. They could have been doing this for the last 20 years, and that needs to be part of the solution as we move forward, because then we can reduce the cost of peaking power, which is the most expensive kind of power that raises our rates tremendously. The utilities and the Public Utilities Commission need to do a lot more on that. Now let's look at the supply side. On the supply side, the least cost option is wind power, followed by utility-scale solar, followed by wind power coupled with energy storage, which is the same cost as natural gas. So we're having a rush in the state to build all these natural gas units, but they're not the least cost options for customers. We talk about wanting to create a competitive market, and I totally, 100% endorse that. But we have to have a level playing field. That is critical to make that work. But we have impediments built into our laws that make the playing field unlevel. For example, a solar producer can put together a project, get it approved by the Power Siting Board, and then a county commission can say, we don't want it, and it's nixed. That puts a chilling effect on solar companies to even develop projects in our state in the first place. Wind, you have to have a quarter-mile setback for a wind facility. I don't hear anything about that for gas plants. If I had a choice between a windmill and a gas plant, I would choose a windmill in a heartbeat, because I don't have to worry about emissions, nasty emissions coming from gas plants. So we need to take away these impediments, levelize the playing field, call for competitive bidding, because that will get us to the least cost options, but it'll be done on a fair basis. So these are some of the things that I think we really need to focus on in legislation going forward. And I think we need to have careful reviews of all possible projects. There's legislation pending that would reduce, would reduce the power siting board review of natural gas plants. I don't think that's a good idea, because if they're there for like 30 years, and if it's not a good project and it has environmental problems, we're not getting that identified and fixed at the front end, and it could impact customers. So to summarize, we should do least cost planning competitively, starting with energy efficiency programs, demand response programs, and then let all the supply side options bid and let the best project win. Thank you.
Thanks, Bryant. As a recovering lawyer, legislator, and regulator, I'm going to follow my fellow panelists' purview and ignore the 3-minute limit that we were given at the beginning. So a couple of thoughts. I was asked to share kind of a broader perspective, because the Electric Power Supply Association represents competitive power generators of all types across all of the country, from California to Texas to New England to PJM to New York and SPP and MISO. There are resources as well. And our members still own all types of resources, so coal, nuclear, gas, battery storage, geothermal, hydro, what did I miss? Wind, solar, I think I covered them all. If there's one out there, our members own it and operate it. And the benefit that's provided by our members' approach, and that is done in restructured states, I don't like the nomenclature deregulated, because that suggests that there's no rules, and boy, there are rules. So in a restructured jurisdiction, we still have the opportunity to operate in a way that keeps the costs off the backs of customers and allows the customer to avoid bad investment decisions or be burdened with non-bypassable charges for things like new generating resources that have been mentioned. I agree. We're going to need more generating resources. Demand is going up. I do think we need to maybe use our saucer and tea cup example a little bit here. I think the temperature of the rhetoric gets a little warm when we talk about the crisis and we can't possibly meet it and we've got to take draconian measures to get there from here, because I think we are in a good spot and there is room for us to deliver solutions in a way that is cost effective and will ensure reliability and will ensure the economic development opportunities can exist. I say all that to say this is not unique to Ohio. It's a good problem to have. In fact, I view it as an opportunity. But we are seeing these types of load growth forecasts in restructured parts of the country, like Ohio, but also in vertically integrated portions of the country, like the Southeast, like some parts of the Midwest, like Arizona. And the thing that you don't often hear is that our utility cousins are subject to the same supply chain pressures that we are. They are subject to the same permitting and approval processes that we are. They are subject to the same workforce issues that we are. We have to have people that can actually construct, build, and operate this equipment going forward, and that's becoming a more and more important issue as we look at how we're going to meet the energy demands in the future. And I'm optimistic that we will meet the moment and be able to do that. And I think part of how we do that is by keeping all of us in our appropriate lane. And by that I mean competitive generators keep the risk off of captive customers and put it on the shareholders and investors. So if we make a bad investment, you know who loses the money? We do. It's not something that you'll carry as a captive customer for the next 30 years in a non-bypassable charge. I agree with Kenny and with Ryan and Janine also. We need a reliable and robust transmission and distribution infrastructure, because without that, you can't move the electrons to where they need to go. We need healthy electric distribution utilities, and I see Mark's here, and co-ops and municipals as well, need to be able to deliver those electrons, because that's how we power the economy. So it's critically important that people do their portion of the energy value chain well. And it may not be popular with some, but I think we're going to need to see additional natural gas infrastructure, because you're going to need to be able to move those molecules from where they're being produced to where they're going to need to be used. And for the short, medium, and probably intermediate period of time, natural gas facilities are the fastest to market and the most dispatchable and reliable resource. I don't disagree with half of what Janine said about the wind and battery pairing, because I do think we need to look at the levelized cost of entry. I think what you need to do, however, is look at the complete cost of the levelized cost of entry. And EPSA did a study along with FTI about 6 months ago that looked at what does it actually cost to achieve the same level of dispatchability or reliability of the system. And the cost curves change fairly dramatically when you look at that all-in cost. Natural gas still remains the least expensive if you're trying to put the all-in cost together, but it moves the needle for nuclear, it moves the needle for some versions of small modular reactors, which we all hope will ultimately be deployable, but today they're just not there. They're probably 5 to 10 years away if we're being honest about where we are with that. How do you plan for a 10-year away outcome when we have immediate issues that need to be addressed in the next 3 to 5 years, or even right now? You're seeing competitive suppliers respond to market signals and make announcements about uprates, converting peaking units into combined cycles so they can operate on a 24/7 basis in a dispatchable manner that will allow the system to respond to the increased demand while we're solving the longer-term problems. And when you rely on the market to do that and send the appropriate signals, the dollars will flow, and those are dollars that are not required to be paid by captive customers. That's the win when Ohio sticks with the competitive model.
Awesome. Thank you all. So I think the theme that we definitely heard from here is competitive. From an economic development standpoint, Kenny, what do we need to do to make sure Ohio remains competitive?
Well, I would agree that we need to make some choices, but I do think that we can't be saying it's either or all the time. Like what I heard even just through this, we have manufacturing customers and hyperscale data centers that are absolutely dependent on base load power that could only be delivered from certain sources that is firm power, essentially. It can't be turned off. You have manufacturing members where if the process stops, they're losing millions of dollars or even more than that. We have data centers that count on reliability. When we log on in the morning, we expect the cloud to come up and all of our data to come up, and we're absolutely dependent on that for the trading of stocks and all kinds of things. And so we have that. We want consumers, but you made a great point about affordability. We make our living saying this is an affordable place to live. Energy is a component of your monthly bill. We want to make sure that consumers are protected and taken care of. I do think that Todd's constituents and the independent power producers are going to react very well to some of the things that are being considered in Ohio, and that should react really well. And quite frankly, we need healthy investor-owned utilities for the infrastructure and for it to always be there when we need it. Like, we need all of those things to work together. The final thing that we're going to have to do, and I think this is actually an economic development opportunity, the generation itself is an economic development opportunity. It's going to bring billions to Ohio if it's built and create jobs, just like it has in the history of Ohio. But there's another component that is really exciting right now, and that's the innovation sector. We're going to see more innovation in the energy sector in the next 5 years than we saw in the previous 30 or 35 because of this demand increase, largely driven by hyperscale data centers. I don't know if anybody watched the NVIDIA annual meeting here recently, and he was talking about the demand for AI chips, not just for NVIDIA, by the way. And who makes those chips? Intel, TSMC. Those are the two main producers of advanced chips in the world. So it's cool that Ohio's in the middle of it. We have a mindset of abundance here locally. We needed to have that in our state house. We need to have that in our private sector and our public sector as we address these challenges. I suspect Ohio's not going to just be fine, but we're going to actually leverage this opportunity and be better than ever by the end of the decade. We'll seize this opportunity, is my hope.
That's awesome. So then going back to being competitive, Ryan, from a business perspective, how is this impacting you now, and what do you think the outlook will be for us within the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, well, as I said, we think we're in a good situation. We think we're well positioned, right? We have abundance of those different natural resources, and the transmission grid that we have here is attractive. And it's attractive not just for power users like manufacturers, but it's attractive to generators who want to serve energy consumers, whether it's manufacturers or data centers. So we think there's a lot to be excited about. The Western PJM, that's the region of the grid that we're in, Western Pennsylvania and Ohio, generally seen as the opportunity zone in PJM to build power generation and to export it into other parts of the power grid. That's positive. We want to see that kind of investment. That's prosperity. That's how capitalism works. We're optimistic today, this week, the legislature just within hours has acted to adopt far-reaching energy legislation that we believe will protect competitive markets and add some of that transparency that I was talking about that we think is going to be important to help and empower not just customers, but also regulators, economic developers with the tools they need to know where they can plug in today and not have to wait for years for costly new investment of transmission. And maybe there's other innovative solutions in generation nearby. That is happening. Some of the data centers, Caitlin Savage is in the house here from Google, and they're one of the Magnificent Seven, right? The nickname for the $7 trillion tech companies, and they're very much now part of the Ohio economy, and we're glad to have that as part of our future prosperity.
Can I add just one little fact?
Actually, I think Janine had her hand, so I'll police that one, Kenny. I'll come back to you, I promise.
Ryan made a very good point about transparency. And one of the issues when I was the Consumers Counsel is that there were a lot of what was called electric security plan cases approved, which we often did not sign on to and often appealed. But they were like huge, an electric security plan is a fancy word for a rate increase. So these cases, often there were big chunks of money given to the utilities to upgrade their infrastructure. And it was very hard to know where that money was going, how it was being spent. And so I would recommend, as part of transparency, I harken back to the days when we used to have fuel cases when utilities were regulated. And every year they would have to come in and they would have to show what their fuel expenses were. And they would recover the costs that were just and reasonable and prudent. But we always had a management audit and a financial audit, which was extremely helpful in identifying how are they spending their money, how are they, and also how are they managing the coal supplies and all of their supplies. So as we go forward, when we talk about transparency, we need to have accountability, and I would recommend bringing back those kinds of proceedings with audits, regular audits of you're getting all of this money to improve your infrastructure. Are you doing it in a least cost basis? Because remember also, under the utility rate-making formula, the utilities earn a return on their investment. Their fiduciary duty is to their shareholders, not the customers. So what they have an incentive to gold plate things, because that means more money back to their consumers. And that's not to say they all do it and they do it on everything, but it does happen. So if we have these kinds of audits to look at how they're spending the money, I think we would find a lot more efficiency and we'd save customers a boatload of money.
Kenny, back to you.
I was just going to, for those non-energy people in the room, it's not odd for us to get a request for a gigawatt of power at a single facility now. So just giving you ideas of the scale of the demand increase. A gigawatt of power is enough power to power 750,000 homes, American homes, for a year. So that could be one data center building. So I agree with Ryan that you're beginning to see the demand increase. You will begin to see this increase a lot more than just gradually. And so dealing with these issues, making choices is absolutely paramount. It is not something we can push off anymore. The scale of the demand increase is not gradual if we just pay attention. It is a lot more than that, and I'm glad to see that in Ohio. But we're going to have to make some choices and make some decisions.
Brian, if I can just tack on two things. One of which is I agree in the transparency, and of course Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 15 that are currently being considered in the General Assembly will do many of the things that Janine just mentioned and would increase transparency, require utilities to reappear for rate cases where some electric utilities haven't been in 17 years or so. That's a problem. And so the bill will correct some of those excesses in an effort to ensure a greater degree of transparency. That's a win. And I agree with Kenny about what the size of some of the new demand requests are. The challenge that we are running into, and certainly we are receiving the same kind of calls that our utility cousins are, is you'll have a hyperscaler that reaches out to half a dozen places to try to figure out where the best location will be, and everybody plans as if they're the winner. So that means your 1,000 megawatt or 1 gigawatt project is getting counted multiple times. I don't know what the number is, but my example, it would be 6 times. So you're going to build out infrastructure for 6,000 megawatts when 1,000 is all that needed. That's how you end up in problems with costs. That's how you overbuild. That's how you end up in bad situations. So I think that does give us a little bit of runway as we hear some of these astronomical projections, which are probably right somewhat. You've seen all kinds of load forecasts that range between 2% to 10% year over year from now over the next 10 years. I don't know what the right number is, but I know it's probably between the 2 and the 10. That tells me that we've got the opportunity to make sure that we can achieve the outcomes that we want, do it cost effectively, and if you empower competitive suppliers to do it, that generation component for those thousands and thousands of megawatts that'll be needed is not going to be paid by the captive customer. It's going to be paid by investors and shareholders who will then benefit if they are able to be competitive and they are least cost and they are dispatched to run, and if they're not, then they don't get paid. But that risk is on them, and it's not on you as customers.
That's awesome. So back to you, Todd. As we continue to see this demand go from a steady increase to potentially a very steep increase, how do we balance the cost competitive nature along with making sure that we're robust and quickly scalable?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's probably the one that's on the minds of virtually all of the developers, the utilities, and competitive generators, quite frankly. I think as you look at what we're trying to accomplish as a country and to win the AI race and to be the world leader and not be behind China or not be behind other parts of the world, we've got to think holistically. You know, I'm going to say later today in my testimony to the House that the pie is big enough for everyone to benefit in this opportunity we have before us, as long as people don't get greedy. And by that I mean competitive suppliers should do what we do and build plants and operate cost-effective plants and do so as efficiently as possible in response to market signals. Utilities should build the wires that are transmission and distribution, whichever side they need to be on, in order to cost-effectively deliver the electrons from where they are to where they need to be. Ohio's a shopping state, so for those of you that are not retail shopping customers, virtually all the commercial and industrials are doing it because it allows them to control their spend. But even you as a residential consumer have the ability to shop, and this dramatic price increase that you've perhaps heard so much about as a result of one auction in PJM, if you have a fixed price contract that you're already a customer of, you're immune to that. Because in Ohio, fixed means fixed. So if you signed a contract that says you're going to pay 8 cents, you're going to pay 8 cents until that contract expires, and then it's your obligation as a customer to choose something else. It's just like what you do with your cell phone plan or when you go buy gasoline or the other things. It's customer choice. So that's another way that you're going to have in order to make sure that you can manage your costs in a way that makes sense for you. We'll do our part to try and deliver the electrons when they're needed, where they're needed, and we're counting on our utility partners to give us the wires in order to get them from where they are to where they need to go.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Ryan, if I could, yeah, just to pick up a point there that Todd said, and we mentioned the legislation earlier, pending over at the State House. The Speaker of the House, Matt Huffman, President of the Senate, Rob McCauley, to be commended. We support this legislation, and it provides transparency and some nice customer protection. But even with that transparency, one thing we're still not going to be able to do is predict the future. So kind of the premise of the question, what's the amount of load uptick going to be, right? We think, again, it's been pretty flat for 25 years, and you're seeing customers consuming less electricity. You're seeing grid enhancing technologies by the grid owners, the utilities, that's good. And you see better demand peak load management practices. That's primarily the reason that demand has stayed relatively flat. So will it creep up or will it go up more significantly? We don't know, but I think it's important to point out that innovation always solves the problems, right? So the more that demand might go up because of that, there's going to be an innovation that's going to turn it down. So 2 months ago, DeepSeek, the Chinese AI company, said that they can do similar AI technology, 1/fraction of the investment, but importantly in this conversation, 1/20th of the electricity consumption, 5% versus 100% of electricity to run a data center. I'm not taking that to the bank, but it just shows of how process innovation works. So there will be pressure to reduce the amount of electricity that's required for any process, whether it's data centers or whether it's manufacturing. That's the way innovation drives economic activity. And so that will come in the future. And as Mr. Snitchler said, we agree that the data centers have been counted multiple times in some of the existing load forecasts. So combine those two factors, and we may be getting excited over something that's really a non-event.
So just want to make sure we're keeping on schedule. So thank you all. At this point, we're going to make sure we keep with CMC's longstanding tradition of fielding audience questions. So if you're in the audience today, please slowly make your way to the microphone in the back. If you are joining us on YouTube, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat. And with that, I'll ask one more question. I'll keep this to a 60-second rapid fire. Please hold us 60 seconds, folks, on this one to make sure we're staying on track. And it's going to be an open-ended one, right? We've talked about a lot up here today. There's obviously a lot more conversation that can be had. But where does Ohio go from here?
I think I've hit on this a couple times. We think we're well positioned. Let's get some additional transparency. Let's let market forces make the decisions. So as Todd said, investors get to make those decisions on where to invest, not captive customers. That would be a disaster.
I think we're in an awesome position to grow Ohio. We have natural resources. We're a competitive place to do business, to manufacture, to put your AI operations, to put your R&D, to put your headquarters and launch these AI initiatives that we've been talking about. We think we can do it all here, and we shouldn't really compromise on our opportunities. What we're going to have to make some choices on is how do we power this on the back end. And I just say we're going to have to do things a little differently going forward. Today's legislation is part of that, and then I think the conversation continues about how this plays out over the next 5 to 10 years. It'll be an interesting bet about how technology and innovation actually make this a little easier or a little harder.
I think the fact Ohio is in a good position with having passed deregulation or restructuring. You're welcome. But we still have some things we need to work on. And one of them is if we want to play a fair playing field, which is what restructuring and competition is all about, we have to levelize the playing field, and we have to remove the impediments that discriminate against certain technologies in favor of others to levelize that playing field. And we have to, in a very big way, get our utilities to start doing a lot more on energy efficiency and demand-side management programs that can lower costs for customers, because all of this, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to grow and develop, but we have to be mindful of the cost to all the consumers who pay the bills and their ability to live comfortable lives in the state.
I'm reminded of a couple of quotes that I think capture it nicely. I always get it wrong, so I'll say that I'm paraphrasing, but I think it's on Governor Rhodes' statue out in front of the Rhodes Tower that says, "Ohio's open for business." I think that remains true. I think it remains a great place to do business. And then I'm also reminded of Al Davis, whose famous quote was, "Just win, baby." That's what Ohio needs to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your input today. And with that, I'll transition it back to Doug Buchanan with CMC for some questions.
Bryant, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. If you do have a question for our panelists today, please do join us here at the microphone again. As Bryant mentioned, if you're watching online on YouTube, please type your question in the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common, right? They take less than 30 seconds to ask. And what punctuation mark does a question end with? It ends with a question mark. Thank you, Bill. I'll launch us off with this one. Where does Ohio's electricity currently come from, geographically speaking? And what's the main fuel source, and has this changed in the last 10 to 15 years? Is it changing now?
Good question. So Ohio is a state that participates in the PJM interconnection. People have probably heard of PJM if you're here at an energy discussion. So our power comes from all over the grid. And that grid is really all of North America, but PJM is 13 states in the District of Columbia. I often find it funny when you have to remind people that electrons don't observe state borders. They don't care where you are. When you open your light switch, the nearest electron, wherever it is, moves at the speed of light, and it goes to your open switch. So where does it come from? It could be anywhere. Specifically, Ohio generates about, I forget the number, it's changed now with retirements and additions, but it's roughly 20,000 megawatts, I think, of its own power. And if you listen to Reliability First, who came and testified in the General Assembly, Ohio has enough power to power its own economy, but we import power today from other parts of the region because it's less expensive. That's good for Ryan's members and for you as consumers, that you're getting the cheapest power you can across the system. How has that changed over the last 10 or 15 years? Well, I can tell you very dramatically. Coal used to be a substantial portion of the generating resources across PJM, not just in Ohio. Now it is predominantly gas, nuclear, and then probably coal, and then renewables make up the balance of that. So you're probably, my percentages might be a little off, but 65% gas, you're probably 20% nuclear, you're probably 15% coal, and the balance is renewables. That's what's powering Ohio's grid today, and that has changed pretty dramatically. Coal used to be 65-ish%, so coal and gas have switched. There was virtually no renewables 20 years ago, and so you've seen a pretty dramatic evolution over the last 15 or 20 years. I say all that simply to say that even now, your supply of renewables in PJM is roughly 4%. So it's not as if renewables are 80% of the PJM grid. That's not the case today.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I'm Bill Wayhoff of Steptoe and Johnson. And my question is, with the Shell Oil polyethylene pellet plant having gone online in western Pennsylvania and others in southern Ohio, the expectation is that plastics manufacturing will increase. And has that happened? And is the grid in eastern Ohio sufficient to handle the increase in plastics manufacturing that should come from those raw materials being available? Thank you.
I'll be happy to grab that. So we're very excited about all of those investments. Monaca, Pennsylvania, outside Pittsburgh, Shell has their ethylene cracker where they crack out different petroleum distillates that are used as a raw material in the manufacture of plastics and other polymer products. So we are seeing investment throughout the state, and in particular in the region that's nearby. It's good for the entire regional economy. I think we support every aspect of that. Those plants, just like any other manufacturer, are going to be electricity dependent. So manufacturing in general, probably 2 to 5% of their overall cost structure is going to be in electric inputs, which is what we're talking about today. But there are other types of manufacturers, certain chemical plants, steel mills, they're going to be significantly higher than that because that's a major input in how they're transforming the molecule in the product. So it is tied to this conversation, and the more that we have that chemical feedstock in the country, in this part of the region, that's good. And of course, it also flows through the newer interstate pipelines and intrastate pipelines that can be used for the generation of electricity and is being used increasingly for the generation of electricity at power plants. But perhaps additionally in the future, we're going to see more on-demand, behind-the-meter applications, which is an exciting opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Next question: how do all of these issues impact my family's ability to function, impact my wallet, impact me as a consumer? What can I do to support the right environment to meet our energy needs? So, asking from a consumer family standpoint, how this will impact them.
They're all pointing to me, so I'll take this one. There's a lot you can do in terms of participating in proceedings at the PUCO when utilities file for rate increases. Take advantage of programs that are out there depending upon your income level. But affordability and being able to have the energy you need is a critical issue. A large percentage of customers are really struggling and are at low ends of the poverty guideline. So if we restore our energy efficiency, write your legislators, ask them to restore energy efficiency standards. That will enable you to weatherize your home, take advantage of opportunities to lower your bills and decrease your usage and save money that way. But as there's some very, very complex issues that come into play with as we add more generation and we decide in public utility proceedings, how do you allocate the costs among customer groups? Typically, residential customers take up 40% of the whole demand, and so they pay 40% of the cost. But if most of this is being built for data centers or for businesses, should we be taking another look at that in order to minimize the rate increases that residential customers are susceptible to? So I guess as what I would say to customers is, when there are public hearings, come and testify, get engaged, contact your legislators, participate in energy efficiency programs, participate in demand response programs, and if you're in a community that has aggregation, that is a great tool. Ohio is one of the few restructured states that has aggregation, and it's a great tool because your municipality will negotiate with a supplier, and I haven't seen cases really where customers have not gotten rate discounts as a result of signing up with them. And if your community doesn't have it, talk to your city councils and see if they would be willing to move forward with aggregation. That's another way to save some money off of your energy bills.
I'll just add quickly, if you're not a shopping customer, consider shopping.
I'm Jeff Lemichuk. I guess I'm here as a taxpayer. So one of the things that hasn't been discussed that plays my mind is when I've researched these data centers, they really don't employ a lot of people, and they suck up huge energy needs. Nobody's addressed the cities, the counties, the state that are giving these profitable these profitable companies tax abatements, 10, 20 years, 50, 100% tax abatement. Think of all that money that could be used to upgrade the grid that we're not getting with these abatements. So my question to the panel is, do you support these data centers with a surcharge for energy so the taxpayers in Ohio don't get screwed over like the House Bill 6 that happened?
I'll address that because we're obviously working with our state and our local partners on this on a pretty daily basis, and we have for a decade. Let me applaud the communities and the approach that they've taken in Ohio, which is there are certain tax mitigation strategies that help catalyze the investment. On the other hand, these are revenue generators at a local level. And it's coming at a very unique time in Ohio's history. There was times when we had high unemployment, and the jobs that you're speaking of would be paramount and be first in order for city councils and county commissions. Now it's really revenue. It's a conversation about revenue. When I look at a local level and I look at the state benefit from a tax standpoint, from the billions of dollars that have been invested here by some of those brand name companies and a whole lot of co-location providers and stuff like that. Ohio and our local communities are an incredible beneficiary from a revenue standpoint that are funding some of our schools, they're funding additional infrastructure, going back into our communities and funding parks and our police force and firefighters and everything else. So they've been an incredibly attractive investment for Ohio. And they're competitive to get. 10 years ago, it was a big win for us. Now, perhaps we take them for granted from a public standpoint, but I continue to see the net benefit of them when I look locally and across the state with the tax revenue that is generated from them. And I think I think we're a better state because of them being here. I actually think they make our partners in manufacturing and in the corporate headquarters sector also more competitive, and it's helped us build a ton of infrastructure around the state that's actually very helpful to building housing and everything else that is a whole nother forum conversation. So great question. We think there's a net benefit.
Can I add one point to that? This is a topic that is being discussed nationally as data centers continue to grow. And there have been some proposals that if the increase in load is strictly due to the data centers, maybe the data centers ought to pay for it in order to reduce the burden on residential customers. But that's something that's under discussion. AEP has some proposals out there. But it is a big concern. It is a big issue. And there's no one solution at this point because it's an emerging issue.
Thank you. Kathy Cowan Becker says she understands that Senate Ohio's Senate Bill 2, House Bill 15 would let an applicant build a gas plant on property they own with a 45-day process and no local approval. How can we ensure that gas plants are not built in residential areas?
Start off with that one. First of all, let's hope that doesn't pass in the law. That's my first answer. We need better, what the law defines is called priority investment zone. So if it's a priority investment zone and it's located near a customer's home and it's in a residential area, I don't see anything in the law that addresses that particular issue. So it is something that needs to be resolved. But a 45-day approval process for any kind of power plant is just doesn't work. It's untenable. We need the time to review and make sure these projects are safe, especially when they're being located in residential areas.
I'd only add that it's not passed yet, so it's still subject to amendment, and there are certainly parties who have expressed their concerns about some of these issues. I think you have to keep in mind, however, that Ohio still has an Ohio Power Siting Board, and the Power Siting Board is the one who does the review and makes sure that things are being considered as part of an approval process. Having chaired that body when I was at the commission, we do know and are familiar with the data that comes in and how it ought to be considered. And I think the Power Siting Board's charge is to make the best possible decision that it can. And the Power Siting Board's charge really was to try not to have this be a local community mano a mano, but to say we're trying to take the broader look, we're trying to arrive at an outcome that's just and reasonable that will deliver what Ohio was looking for from an economic perspective while also taking into consideration the local impacts without having veto power basically be held by one township trustee or county commissioner. So it's not resolved yet because the bill hasn't passed, and it's certainly an issue that I know is getting attention in the General Assembly.
I'd like to just add on one thing very quickly to this, is that a 45-day approval process really doesn't give the Power Siting Board the amount of time to really dig into things and look at things in a very good way. The process has traditionally been a heck of a lot longer, and it really precludes the opportunity for the public to participate. So 45 days to me is just not a workable number.
We have 2 minutes left for a final quick question.
Hello, my name is Lorraine McCosker. I'm a retired environmental studies instructor from Ohio University and a farmer. I live in one of the 32 Appalachian counties in Ohio where a lot of the extracted gas and waste is placed. I do want to say that we have had a discussion for 55 minutes now without breathing the word climate change. And I think that that's a failure. We have stressors in our society and certainly in our economy and environment. So just to say that according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 2022, Ohio ranked 5th in carbon dioxide emissions. And right now, our carbon dioxide monitored by Mauna Loa is 430 parts per million. In 2008, we passed Senate Bill 221, which actually created efficiency standards and incentives for utilities to look at energy efficiency and inputs. So I think that this is a failure. So can you please address how this sort of pie in the sky, how I see it is just not dealing with reality, that we're going to generate all this energy while we're in a climate crisis.
I'll take a quick shot at that. I'm not sure it'll be satisfactory, but I'll try. In the end, Ohio has a great story to tell because Ohio has led the country in emissions reductions. PJM has led the country as a region in reducing emission reductions since 2005. Ohio is the leading state with emissions reductions as a result of fuel switching and other technologies being deployed in the state. So while I share the concern about being sustainable and making sure that we are achieving the objectives that society has determined is appropriate, Ohio is actually leading the way in helping to achieve those objectives as opposed to being some kind of laggard that is not actually doing its part.
Quickly, and just to emphasize, the prior question had a reference to House Bill 6, and there's 10 times more solar online in Ohio after Larry Householder was excused of his roles at the State House. So there's a market for renewable energy. The prior conversation about the power siting board, there's a lot of rationalization that could be done there, but we think the market needs to drive that, and that's the best way to drive those kinds of alternatives. We're for all the above of energy sources.
So one quick comment, which is that energy efficiency and renewable energy development, it's a twofer, because not only does it reduce costs, and it's the lowest cost option, but it's also the best in terms of environmental damage. And these are very important concepts. While Ohio may be leading in reducing emissions, if we go forward with some of the legislation, we're going to reverse that. And if you compare Ohio to every state in the nation, I doubt Ohio is in the lead in terms of the least amount of emissions. So we do need to look at all options.
Well, with that, we are out of time. I know this was a quick 30 to 45 minutes. We could probably continue this for another 3 days. And with that, I'll actually turn the podium back over to Doug Buchanan.
Okay, thank you all. I just have a few quick closing comments, and don't worry, I will be the only person up here tonight who sticks to 3 minutes. I hope you found today's community conversation enlightening. I want to thank today's sponsor, the Columbus region. We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Ellis for hosting us. And a very special appreciation to today's speakers, Ryan Augsburger, Kenny McDonald, Janine Migden-Ostrander, Todd Snitchler, and our host, Bryant Petway. How about a hand for all of them? So, in-person tickets for next week's forum, which is a conversation with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, they are sold out, so please make plans to join us online if you haven't had your tickets yet. The live stream is free, but the purchase of a virtual seat is a great way to support your not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.